In previous videos, we saw our target application and the overall features of applications for smart devices. Now we will see the conceptual model that corresponds to these applications, including the 4 screen types required, as well as the objects that implement them and the relations between them. The first screen we will see is the menu. The menu basically contains items that correspond to the options available to the user. The second screen is a list of elements for working, which usually is what we know as work with, the data in a transaction. In this case, with speakers. The way in which the data is presented on the list can be configured. What's important is that this screen, by default, indicates that upon tapping on an element from the list, the third screen type, the detail screen, is automatically called in view mode. To allow CRUD actions, create, update, delete, this stage will also include a layout for addition, modify, or insert, which we're not showing here. And lastly, we have panels, which provide the possibility to freely design the layout without a predetermined structure. Everything is implemented from scratch by the developer. For example, the tweets screen, with data obtained through a web service. Even a session's detail may be implemented as a panel. We have 3 objects to implement these screens in their functionalities, namely, dashboard implements the menu. Next, the work with for smart devices, which is a 2-in-1, an object and a pattern. Unlike the work with for web, it is not an instance file from which we create objects to implement the typical work with the data in a transaction. It is rather an object that includes the type of sub-objects that implement list and detail screens with all their sections. In general, this object is associated with the transaction, but being an object that may be created from the object creation dialog, it is then flexible to create all its screens, list and detail from scratch, and load the information from wherever it's required. Then we have the panel for smart devices, similar to web panels. These are also similar to any of the list screens or the screens of each section in the detail of the work with for smart devices. They are created from scratch, so the developer is free to include or remove anything, and then load data from the database or from anywhere else. To sum up, we have these 3 types of objects where the work with smart devices encapsulates the list and the detail. At the detail level, it encapsulates the screens to view general and related information, and the addition screen, CRUD, of general information for CRUD operations. With the example of the work with for smart devices pattern applied to the speaker transaction, the invoking syntax will be as follows. For the detail, the view mode will be this one. Note that it will be necessary to pass the primary key. And for the detail and edit mode, the navigation will be upon indication and operation. Insert, update, or delete. We will get back to this later. Now let's take a look at the details of each object. The dashboard object will basically consist of items that specify the actions to be made available to users. Each of them will correspond to an event where we program who is invoked as a result of selecting the item. Every time we insert an action in the dashboard, the Select Objects window will be opened automatically for us to select the object we wish to invoke as a result of that action. The invocation will be automatically programmed in the events that we may obviously modify. There may be several dashboard objects inside the application, as many times as we need to use the menu. Unlike web applications, which allow multiple points of entry from URLs, the applications for smart devices that will be installed on the device will have a single point of entry that is usually a menu, and thus a dashboard object. And this is why dashboards are main objects by default. Even when every platform has its own standards, we may decide that the menu items be shown as a table, which is the default option for Android, or as a list, which is the default option for tablets, or as tabs, the default option for iPhones, where the central area will display the object called by the first item, in our case, sessions. To change the default behavior, we have a property in the dashboard which enables us to select one from the three values: table, tabs, or list. It's the control property. Starting from the speaker transaction, applying the work with for smart devices pattern will result in the creation of an object of that type, presenting a hierarchical structure representing both the list and the detail. The developer may customize it by working directly on its screens, as we will see in the following pages: adding or removing levels, or even deleting the list or the detail, or removing or adding sections to the detail. When we apply the pattern to the one-level transaction, speaker, we get a level that corresponds to that level in the transaction, with the hierarchical structure referred. And this indicates that we could have more parallel levels. Here we see the invocation to the list of the speaker level, the only one we have so far. The detail includes several sections: the general section, which corresponds to the information in that level of the transaction, and a section for each table of the database with directly subordinate data, in this case, data about the sessions that the speaker is part of. The invocation is done to the detail as a whole, with the primary key passed by parameter. So, where is the list screen we see at runtime designed? In the node list of the work with. And where is the screen to view the detail of a speaker's general information? We can find this in the node section, general, of the detail node in view mode. And what about the screen corresponding to the sessions of that speaker? This is in the node section, session, corresponding to data from the subordinate table of speaker. And lastly, where is the screen that enables CRUD, create, update, delete operations implemented? For example, the one we accessed when we tapped on the update icon of the view screen. This is also in the general section, but in the edit tab of the bottom menu. To implement a panel from scratch, such as the tweets one, we have an object that is just like any of the nodes in the work with. The difference with the work with applied to a transaction is that while the work with screens are initialized, the panel is totally empty. Also, it has no associated logic of any type. In this specific panel, we can see that the developer has inserted a grid with variables in the layout, which will be loaded in the load event for each line, consuming a web service in this case, similarly to how it's done in a web panel. So, the time has come to start developing our Event Day application from scratch. We'll do this in the next video.